In the town of Silver Pine, fall didn't arrive by date, but by the smell of damp bark and chimney smoke curling through the narrow streets. The town was small, a cluster of homes tucked against the edge of the forest where the trees turned gold before the calendar even whispered October. On the far end of the town, past a broken fence and a leaning mailbox, stood a crumbling house that no one entered anymore. Its windows were boarded up, its roof slanted, and the paint peeled like dry bark. In the basement of that forgotten house sat a metal cage. Inside, barely visible through the shadows, was a German shepherd puppy. Thin, underfed, his coat dulled with dust and cobwebs, he curled into himself as if trying to vanish into the corners. His ribs showed clearly beneath the coat that might once have been warm and soft. He didn't bark, not anymore. He had, at first, short, high cries that echoed off the concrete walls, but no one came. Eventually, he stopped. Days passed, then weeks, maybe longer. The puppy lived in stillness, surviving off rainwater that trickled down the wall, licking at rusted bars and gnawing on the remnants of the towels someone had left beneath him. He didn't understand why he was there. He only remembered a hand, once gentle, that had led him into the cage. A voice that whispered, "Just wait," and then silence. The door to the basement had closed, and nothing had moved since. Outside, neighbors remembered hearing barking the first few nights. But in towns like Silver Pine, people knew how to ignore things. They told themselves it must be a fox or a dog that ran away. The house was condemned. No one had lived there for over a year. The last tenants had vanished in the night, leaving behind broken furniture and empty bottles. It was by chance that someone returned. A local volunteer named Julie, who worked with the animal shelter, had been asked to inspect the property before demolition. She arrived with gloves and a flashlight, expecting mold and rodents. She didn't expect breath. She descended the stairs slowly, her boots scraping against old cement. The air was still, thick, unmoved. She almost didn't hear it, a faint rasp, not even a whine, just air passing through lungs too weak to cry out. She swept the beam of her flashlight across the floor and stopped. The eyes reflected back at her, wide, unblinking, still. Julie dropped to her knees. The puppy didn't move. Only his sides rose and fell, shallow and slow. She fumbled with the lock, her fingers shaking. The latch gave way with a rusty snap. Still, the puppy did not flee. He didn't whimper. He simply stood, swayed, then took 2 steps forward and placed his head in her outstretched palm. It was as if he had been waiting, not just to be saved, but for her in particular. As if somewhere inside that quiet, fading body, something had held on, not to hope, but to memory. Julie whispered something, anything, just to fill the silence. She wrapped him in her jacket, cradled him like something far more fragile than a dog. As she climbed back up the stairs, the last of the sunlight slipped through the cracks in the boarded window. Outside, the trees swayed, and the wind carried the first smell of cold. That night, for the first time in weeks, the house stood empty again. But in Julie's car, wrapped in fleece and trembling with life, rode something that had survived where most would have surrendered. Julie brought the puppy home that same evening, the sky turning violet behind the trees as she carried him inside. She named him Sage, not after the color, but after the plant known for healing. It felt right, though she didn't know why. He didn't resist the name. In fact, he didn't resist anything. He lay where she placed him, in a corner near the fireplace, on an old fleece blanket that smelled faintly of lavender. The first few days passed in silence. He barely moved. He drank a little water, ate only when coaxed, and slept in long, unmoving stretches. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, Julie would find him trembling. Not from cold, but from something deeper, something stitched into his nerves like memory. She sat with him then, sometimes speaking softly, sometimes just breathing nearby, letting him sense her presence. The vet examined him thoroughly. No broken bones, no infections. His heart was strong, lungs clear, eyes reactive. Physically, he was fine, but the vet said the word that stuck with her. Shut down. Not illness, but something emotional, a system turned inward, a dog who had learned somehow not to expect kindness. So Julie didn't push. She simply existed beside him. She made space, left a bowl of food, a dish of water, a soft rope toy that once belonged to another dog she had fostered years ago. She didn't coax or command. At night, she lay on the floor a few feet away, reading, whispering, waiting. If he needed time, he would have it. It was on the 6th morning that something shifted. She was pouring tea by the window, the sun still low and gold through the glass, when she heard the softest sound, paws on hardwood. She turned, and there he was. Sage. Standing, just barely, looking at her with eyes that no longer seemed hollow. He didn't wag his tail, he didn't bark, he simply looked. And then, with careful steps, he walked to her side and sat. He did not lean against her. He did not ask for touch. He just stayed there. Julie sat on the floor slowly, cross-legged, and for several minutes neither of them moved. Then he lowered his head and rested it near her leg. Not touching, just near, and that was enough. A few days later, a neighbor stopped by, an older man named Howard, who'd recently injured his shoulder in a fall. Julie made him tea, and they sat by the fireplace. Sage watched from a distance. Howard winced as he shifted in the chair, reaching for his mug with his good arm. Without a sound, Sage stood, crossed the room, and sat beside him. Howard smiled uncertainly. "Well, hello there," he said, reaching with his good arm to touch the puppy's head. Sage didn't flinch. Instead, he placed a paw gently on Howard's foot and remained there, still and calm. That night, Howard called her. He told her he hadn't slept so soundly in months. The pain, which usually woke him at least twice in the night, hadn't stirred once. Julie thought it was a coincidence. But then it happened again. With her friend Clara, who suffered from anxiety and had stopped visiting people's homes. She came over one afternoon to drop off a package. Julie invited her in. Clara hesitated, but Sage approached her slowly, sat at her feet, and looked up without blinking. Clara stayed for 2 hours. She cried when she left, not from sadness, but from the quiet that had settled in her chest for the first time in weeks. Julie began to notice the pattern. Sage didn't bark. He didn't seek attention, but he moved toward to people who hurt, not visibly, not loudly, but inwardly. He sat with them, stayed with them, and when they left, they seemed to carry something lighter with them, something unspoken. Julie began to write it all down, not as proof, but as record. She didn't know what Sage was yet, only that he was more than rescued, more than healed. He was beginning to heal others. Word spread faster than Julie expected. She didn't speak of Sage often, didn't post about him on social media or invite attention, but stories moved on their own, shared between neighbors, whispered in waiting rooms, repeated with a kind of quiet awe. People began showing up. Some came with appointments. Others simply knocked on her door. Julie was hesitant at first. She didn't want Sage turned into a miracle, into something commercial or misunderstood, but each person who came wasn't looking for spectacle. They came as if drawn, not by promise, but by hope. The first was a young boy named Ethan, brought by his mother. He suffered from chronic anxiety, panic attacks so severe he couldn't stay in a classroom. Julie welcomed them into her living room. Sage approached gently, sat at Ethan's feet, and placed his head in the boy's lap. Ethan's breathing slowed. He didn't speak, but his mother cried softly in the corner. Then came Clara, a woman in her 60s who had recently lost her husband to cancer. She didn't want to talk about it. She just asked to sit in the same room. Sage didn't touch her. He lay nearby, eyes half closed, barely moving. Clara stayed for over an hour. When she rose to leave, she touched Sage's head and whispered, "Thank you." Julie didn't ask what had happened. She didn't need to. Later, a young man named Marcus arrived. He had returned from deployment overseas and carried the weight of things he never spoke of. He looked worn, as if sleep had forgotten him. He didn't pet Sage. He didn't even sit. He just stood in the kitchen doorway, staring. Sage walked over slowly, brushed his shoulder against Marcus's leg, and stood beside him. Marcus stayed for hours, saying almost nothing. He returned the next day. Julie started keeping a journal, not as proof, but as witness. She wrote dates, names, details they offered, and the way they left differently from how they arrived. No one claimed to be healed. No one said the pain was gone, but every visitor said the same phrase in different words. "It feels lighter now." He seems to understand. It doesn't hurt the same way anymore. Sage didn't perform. He didn't bark, didn't do tricks, didn't leap with joy. He simply stayed close. He sat beside those who couldn't speak. He rested his head on the knees of those who wept. He looked into people's eyes without blinking, without judgment, as if recognizing a part of them they couldn't explain. Veterinarians couldn't explain it. Behaviorists came and watched, took notes, and left with gentle shrugs. "There's empathy," one said, "but not the kind we measure." Julie stopped looking for answers. Instead, she offered space. A quiet room, a soft rug, time. And Sage did what he always did. He listened, he waited, he stayed. There was something sacred about it, not in words or rituals, but in presence. She came to believe that some healing isn't found in doing, but in simply being near something that refuses to turn away. In Sage's silence, people found breath. In his gaze, they found ground. And in his stillness, they remembered themselves. Mary came on a gray Thursday afternoon. She was quiet, worn down by the weight of days spent in sterile hospital rooms. Her son, Josh, 17, had been in a coma for nearly 3 weeks after a car accident. The doctors gave no promises, no improvement, no decline, just stillness. She had heard of Sage from a neighbor, not through news or headlines, but from someone who had sat with the dog and left feeling changed. Mary didn't ask for a miracle. She didn't even believe one was possible, but she came anyway. Julie hesitated. Hospitals had rules. Dogs were not always welcomed. But something in Mary's voice, soft but certain, pushed her to try. She made the calls. She filled out forms. She explained that Sage was no ordinary companion. They were eventually allowed in, with conditions. 1 visitor, 1 handler, 1 quiet room. The hospital was quiet when they arrived. Sage walked beside Julie without hesitation. He didn't sniff the floors or look around. His head stayed low, his steps steady. As they entered the room, the monitors hummed softly. Josh lay motionless, pale beneath the fluorescent light. Tubes ran from his arms. His chest rose and fell, but nothing else moved. Sage stood at the edge of the bed. He didn't bark. He didn't whine. He lifted 1 paw and placed it gently on the mattress, right near Josh's hand. Then he lowered himself slowly and lay down beside the bed, head resting on the cold tile. Minutes passed, then an hour. Nurses peeked in, curious. Mary sat beside her son, silent, eyes full of salt and waiting. Sage didn't move. His breathing was slow, rhythmic, as if matching Josh's. 2 hours passed, and then, without warning, Josh took a deep breath. Not shallow, not involuntary, a deep, full-bodied inhale that shifted the line of his shoulders. Mary gasped. One of the machines began to beep differently. A nurse rushed in. Julie didn't move. Sage lifted his head, just slightly. Josh did not wake. But something changed. Later, the doctors called it an anomaly. A neurological response, they said. No direct connection to stimuli. They told Mary not to get her hopes up. She didn't argue. She just smiled faintly and whispered that her son was still in there. That she could feel him now, not just see him. Sage returned home with Julie that evening. He didn't seem tired. He didn't seem different, but that night, for the first time in weeks, he slept by the door, not on his usual rug in the living room, as if waiting. In the following days, Mary called with updates. Josh began to twitch. His fingers moved, his eyelids fluttered. No promises, no diagnoses, but presence. Julie recorded everything in her notebook, not to prove, not to analyze, just to remember. Somewhere in her notes, she wrote a single line under that date. He didn't come to heal, he came to call something back. Sage became something more than a rescued dog. Not a hero, not a miracle, but a presence. Word spread beyond Silver Pine. He was invited to places where silence lived heavy, to a care home on the edge of town, where old stories faded into white walls, and to a trauma recovery center, where young men sat with eyes that saw too much and mouths that had forgotten how to speak. Sage didn't perform tricks. He didn't follow commands. He didn't offer affection in bursts. He simply existed beside people in stillness. He lay near wheelchairs without moving. He rested his head on laps without prompting. His presence filled the spaces where words had long since lost their weight. People began to call him the healer. Not in a dramatic sense, not with reverence or worship, just softly, almost in secret. It was something whispered in the hallways, something left unspoken in the written reports. The way someone would place a hand on their chest after meeting him, as if to remind themselves they were still there. Julie stopped trying to explain. At first, she had tried to reason it, suggesting it was something instinctive, something ancient in the breed. But there were no studies, no answers, so she stopped. She simply began showing up when asked, bringing Sage, and letting him do what he did best. Nothing that could be measured, everything that could be felt. She noticed a change in herself as well. Julie, who had kept herself busy for years, who had packed grief into organized drawers and labeled boxes, found herself slowing down, breathing more, listening more. One afternoon, she sat in her living room holding a wooden box. It had belonged to her brother, who had died young, years ago. She had never opened it. It had moved with her from apartment to house, always untouched. That day, Sage walked over, slowly, and climbed onto the couch beside her. He didn't look at the box. He didn't nudge her hand. He simply laid his head on her knees. She held the box and looked at it in her hands. And for the first time, without urgency or fear, she opened it. Inside were letters, faded, creased, some written in shaky teenage script. Memories she had buried deep under years of careful silence. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just sat, reading, while Sage breathed quietly beside her. There was no epiphany, no bright light or sudden peace. But something had shifted. A corner of herself, long closed off, had quietly unlatched. She wrote later in her journal, "Some truths can't be spoken, some healings aren't cures, some presences like his just remind us we're not alone in the room." Spring arrived gently in Silver Pine, with damp earth and slow blossoms. Sage turned 2 years old that March. Julie marked the day, not with balloons or noise, but with the kind of quiet that held meaning. On the porch, she laid out a simple blanket he loved, placed a small bowl of his favorite food, and lit a single candle beside it. No speeches, no fanfare, just presence. They came, one by one, people whose paths had crossed with his. A woman who had lost her husband, a man who once couldn't sleep, a teenager who had forgotten how to be calm. Each held a flower, most said nothing. They placed them near the blanket, near him. Sage didn't jump or bark. He simply lifted his head, blinked slowly, and let out a long breath. His eyes drifted closed again, not from fatigue, but from peace. Julie watched from the steps, arms folded loosely across her chest. She hadn't expected anyone to come. She had only lit the candle because it felt right. Yet Here they were, filling the quiet with a weightless warmth, a kind of gratitude that didn't need language. Sage lay at the center of it all, eyes half shut, ears relaxed, body still. He didn't seek attention. He didn't rise to greet, but he was aware. Aware in that subtle, bone-deep way only he could be. He felt the circle form around him, not of worship, but of witness. He had never needed to understand the pain he touched. He only needed to remain, and that was what made him a healer. Not his actions, but his presence, his silence, the way he held space for others without asking anything in return. Julie stayed until the candle flickered low. The flowers lay in a scattered semicircle, some tipped by the breeze. Sage hadn't moved in an hour, just rested with the soft hum of wind in his fur and the warmth of fading sunlight on his back. Sometimes, a healer isn't the one who fixes the broken. Sometimes, a healer is the one who doesn't leave while the pain repairs itself. The one who waits, gently, without forcing the wound closed. Sage had been that. A pup, once locked behind metal, now the quiet key to places no one else could reach. He had unlocked something not in their bodies, but in their hearts. As the last guest stepped off the porch and the candle's flame died down, Julie looked at Sage and whispered something only the wind might have heard. But even without words, he knew. He had stayed, and that had been enough. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps us bring more stories that matter.